Hello everyone, welcome to the 7th student. Today we're doing the specimen paper, specifically theme C for standard level. Okay, so starting off with paper 1A, the first question is, what is a common feature of enzymes? As always, you probably know if you've watched the other videos, but I will count down from 3. You can pause now and think for as long as you want, but just for the sake of time, I will go through them quickly. So in 3, 2, and 1, it's A. Why? Okay, so first of all, enzymes do not decrease the rate of a reaction, they increase it, right? So B is incorrect. They are not all secreted from cells. Actually, some of them stay in cells because some reactions happen in cells, right? So we need enzymes inside cells as well. And then D, they all bind to the active site of their substrate. It's the other way around, right? The substrate binds to the active site of the enzyme. However, they all do react with substrates. That's why it's A. Okay. Next question, what distinguishes aerobic respiration from anaerobic respiration in humans? Again, in 3, 2, and 1. So the answer is D. Why? Okay, because A is incorrect because mitochondria are only used in aerobic respiration, not anaerobic. B is incorrect because it yields much higher quantities of ATP. And C is incorrect because both aerobic and anaerobic can use glucose as a starting substrate. D is correct because in humans, aerobic is the only one that produces carbon dioxide, unlike in yeast, where it's anaerobic respiration that produces carbon dioxide. In humans, remember, anaerobic respiration produces lactate. Okay, so the next question comes up a lot, so definitely stick around. But before we get on to that, I want to mention one thing. This will only take 10 seconds, but I have just started a new site where I'll be posting more content on IB Biology to provide more value to you, and I will also be offering mentoring to those of you who want it. So I definitely recommend checking it out. This is the link, which will also be in the description. And now moving on, this is the question I was talking about. How is the sodium-potassium ratio established during the resting potential phase of neuron activity? And again, 3, 2, and 1. B, why? Okay, first of all, during the action potential, the movement of sodium and potassium is passive, but during the resting potential, it is an active transfer. Why? Because it uses the sodium-potassium pump. And remember, the sodium-potassium pump transfers 3 sodiums out and 2 potassiums in. So that's why the answer is B. Next question, what conveys messages from the central nervous system to an endocrine gland? Again, 3, 2, and 1. D. Okay, so autonomic motor neurons, which are part of the autonomic nervous system, control glands by sending signals from the central nervous system. Good. Next question. Which cell is a component of the innate immune system? I think this one's pretty straightforward. 3, 2, and 1. It's B. Okay, so T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, and B memory cells are all part of the adaptive immune system. B is the only one that's part of the innate. Remember, phagocytes can move to try and eat the pathogen, and they act non-specifically. That's why they're innate. Next question. With respect to the food chain shown in the image, what is the role of the locust? And again, 3, 2, and 1. A herbivore. Why? Okay, because maize is an autotroph, right? It's a producer. And then the locust is the primary consumer, which is not an answer, and the lizard is the secondary consumer. Therefore, the only options left are parasite, chemoautotroph, and herbivore. Now, it's not a parasite that we know, right, based on the food chain. And then it's not a chemoautotroph because then it would be a producer. So instead, it eats the maize. Therefore, it's a herbivore and a primary consumer. But that's, again, not an answer. The next question says that black walnut secretes the chemical juglone into the soil surrounding its roots. Juglone inhibits cell respiration in other species of plants. What does this example illustrate? This is very specific. 3, 2, and 1. Allelopathy. Remember, allelopathy is the secretion of a chemical to deter competitors. So literally the textbook definition of this. It's not interspecific competition because that's between members of the same species. Here it's to inhibit other species. It's not parasitism because it's not being a parasite to any other species. It's just trying to outcompete others. And it's not mutualism because the other species is not benefiting from this. The next question says, which is the density-independent limiting factor for a kangaroo? Importance on density independent, not dependent, independent. Okay, in 3, 2, and 1, it's A. Why? Okay, remember, density-dependent limiting factors affect a population more strongly when the population density increases. but a forest fire affects a population regardless of its size, right? Whereas, for example, something like predation, the more kangaroos, the more hunting that's going to happen, right? And the more they're going to catch their prey. Eutrophication is just the excessive enrichment of water bodies with nutrients, so that really has nothing to do with kangaroos. And then climate change is probably density dependent. Good. So that's all for us with paper 1A. Now moving on to paper 1B, we have this question. The addition of some forms of nitrogen fertilizer to soil can lead to acidification. As a strategy to combat this, farmers will often undertake liming to combat acidification. This involves adding lime to return the pH to neutral. Certain soil pH levels are associated with copper deficiency in cattle. Explain how a copper deficiency in soil could lead to a copper deficiency in a cow. Okay, in 3, 2, and 1. Pretty straightforward, right? If the plants cannot absorb enough copper, then the cows will eat copper deficient plants and thus become copper deficient themselves. The next section is deduce with a reason which action, fertilizing or liming, could lead to a copper deficiency in a cow. Okay, so basically acidifying or not acidifying, right? And 3, 2, and 1. Liming is the one that's going to lead to a copper deficiency. You can see clearly in the graph, right? The higher the pH, aka the more neutral, the less copper is available, right? So actually fertilizing will be helpful to get more copper, right? So liming is not useful in this case. Okay, so now it says that copper deficient cows are more susceptible to infections and do not respond as well to vaccinations. Suggest a role for copper in cows. Okay, 1 mark. So 3, 2, and 1. Okay, well, it's most likely something to do with the creation of antibodies or white blood cell function, because remember, vaccinations, the idea is to trigger the creation of antibodies, right? So we don't know exactly what the copper is doing in the cows, but it has to do something with that if vaccination is not responding properly. Okay, then it goes on to say that phosphorus deficiency leads to poor growth of plants. State an example of a soil pH where phosphorus deficiency might result. Pretty straightforward. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so either here, right, above 7, or below 5.5-ish, right? You can give different numbers, but as long as they're reasonable, right, where you can see that phosphorus goes down by a lot, then you're all good. And then finally, phosphorus deficiency leads to poor growth of plants. List 2 biochemicals important to life that have phosphorus as a raw material. 1 mark. And in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so all nucleic acids, right? So DNA and RNA all have phosphorus, and then also ATP and phospholipids have phosphorus. So hopefully you got this correctly. I hope. Otherwise, go back to the videos on biochemistry, right? The videos on carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, etc. for a recap. Okay, and then the final part is paper 2. There's not much on theme C, so don't worry. First, many flowering plants require an animal pollinator in order to transfer pollen from one flower to another. Explain the type of ecological relationship between the hummingbird and the flower on which it feeds. There's many types of relationships that you can argue here. So 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so it's an interspecific relationship because there are 2 different species, first of all, right? It's also mutualistic because both organisms benefit, right? The hummingbird feeds and the flower gets the plant to reproduce. And then a plant is a producer and a hummingbird is a primary consumer. If you want to talk about the trophic relationship, right? Maybe that's something you didn't think about, but keep it in mind because you can use it in questions like this. The second part says, state one way that plants attract animal pollinators. Okay, tons of ways, right? But 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so it could be the color of flowers or the patterns on the flowers, the scent of the flowers, right? Or just providing nutrients and nectar, which also has to do with the scent, right? And color. The next question, hummingbirds have few natural predators. Suggest one type of behavior that an animal, such as a hummingbird, can display to reduce the risk of predation while it is feeding. 1 mark, again, tons of possible answers. So 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so you can either feed at a time where the predator is not active, right? When it's sleeping, for example, remain extra alert while feeding, right? Mimic another organism, or exaggerate your size, right? So those are all viable options that you can use in this case. I hope you thought of some of these. And finally, paper 2b, so this is the only long mark question for theme C and standard level, is biological systems are sensitive to temperature changes, so they have mechanisms to resist temperature changes. Explain the relationship between temperature and the activity of enzymes. I think this is quite easy. So take your time here. I know it'll take a while, but 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so remember, as temperature increases, the rate of molecular motion increases, right? Particles move faster, and that increases the frequency of collision, right? The faster you move, the more frequent that those random encounters will happen between enzyme and substrate. This increases the rate of the reaction, so when you increase temperature, the rate of reaction increases as well. There is a point, though, where you reach an optimal temperature, right? Where the rate of motion is increased to a point where the frequency of collision is maximum. When you further increase the temperature, the enzymes will denature. Remember, this is because they lose their 3D shape and lose their ability to catalyze the reactions. So if you say this, you're good. You can give more detail if you want, but this is enough. This is what's in the mark scheme. So I hope this was useful. We'll be back next week for another video. And until then, have a great week. Any questions, do leave them in the comments. Goodbye, everyone.